Hey there, friends. It's Dr. Bill, and here is the moment that many of you have been waiting for. Tonight, I'm going to be working on the elementary and secondary extended constructed response prompts from the passage and the essay. And because we're only in November, it's going to be hard to get your students to do extremely well because their, you know, results from the previous year and every single grade level, the average per grade level was more than 50% of the students getting scores of 0 through 5 with both graders in the area of organization, development, and conventions. So what I want to do is not just tell you what you can do, but to tell you how can do it. And I'm going to show you different ways to be able to do it because there should never be one way or the highway. The way that's dictated and mandated or a directive by someone, because that completely takes the originality, the creativity of each individual teacher away from them. If we're going to go to Houston from any origin, we're going to take a lot of different roads, and our GPS maps will allow us to get there. We're just going to take different approaches, different highways, roads, streets. And I think that until we, as administration and regional service centers, learn to just let go and trust teachers that have studied the rubric, learn that it's possible to not get the majority of your kids getting total scores of 0 through 5 in April. So what I'm going to do in this first essay for elementary and even the one for secondary, I'm going to show you two different ways on how you can get at least a 2 for organization and development, and hopefully a 1 or a 2 in conventions. What happens there? If you can get the 2 in conventions, or even the 1, we'll stick with 1 because grammar's not going to be strong yet, and maybe a 2 in the organization development part. That means that that first grader is going to give a total of 3. And if the other grader feels the same, then that score will already be a 6. But as I mentioned, most students are getting 1s and 1s, or a 1 in organization development and a 0 in conventions, which ends up with pretty low scores. So let me use the elementary prompt passage for extended constructed that I sent all of you who requested it last Sunday. Starting tomorrow, I will continue sharing a passage mini practice test a week for elementary and for secondary, but only those who pay for it from here on out will actually get these PDF copies. Okay. I'll occasionally show some lessons, but you won't have access to the materials unless you actually purchase the constructed response for extended or short part 1 or part 2. Just message me or email me at writing_doctor@yahoo.com, and I can set you up so that you can say, may the 6s through 10s be with you by the time we get to April. All right. So this is what a 10-point prompt page looks like for extended constructed response. it'll say the word prompt, but unfortunately, it's not till you see the word explain where the actual prompt is the topic that they're asking about. Explain why, that's the who, what, when, where, why, which, or how. Judy French is qualified to give advice about bullying situations. Okay. The person is Judy French. That's the who. The why is going to be the reason that we have to give. Qualified means what gives her in our minds the right or the privilege or the experience that she has to be able to give advice or to share about bullying situations. Okay. So we have to address that person and her qualifications that she has to help people giving advice. All right. Now, I want you to notice that it always says read the article. So if you're teaching kids to go to the topic, the prompt, without reading the article, Judy French is qualified to give advice about bullying situations. Well, that's called restating or repeating the prompt. You forgot to answer what they're asking. The why part is missing. So you would get a zero, like hundreds of thousands of kids did, because they're not actually responding to the prompt. Okay. In case you did not notice, there are 5 bullets, and I'm going to call that the student rubric on how to get a 5 from 2 different readers. 1, clearly state your central idea, controlling idea, thesis, or if we're doing opinion argumentative, the claim. Okay. Since this is elementary, it'll be our CIS, the central idea. And if they can find that idea about this topic, then your students have a chance to get to one land. Uh, Number 2, organize your writing. Well, every essay should be organized with an introduction that probably has the idea, a body that has basic evidence that's explained, and a conclusion that brings closure to the essay. They can see some sort of structure, not a formula necessarily, but a structure that has that. They can probably get a 2. Develop your ideas in detail. That's the explaining and exploding part. That can move a 2 to a 3 if they're remembering to take the evidence. So remember, if you divide a B for body into 2 pieces, you can place a little E on top and a little E on the bottom. Develop your evidence by explaining. That's the best way to develop. When you explode, you're using the second part of the adult rubric that says you have vivid word choices and vocabulary, and you use, everything flows together. And so that's where the introductions and conclusions can be stronger. There can be a lot of the author's voice that comes out in the writing. The the last bullet is to use correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar. That's what I call the ER. Once you finish your conclusion, your ending, your closure, make sure you go to the editing and revising emergency room, because it does say to do that on the very last thing before you turn it in, and that's the key to get the other 2 points, a 4 or a 5. Okay, so I want you to take a look at my revising graphic organizer, and so I can use this because it says and writing. I'm going to use this to teach you one way to help your students understand the structure of how to get the 5 points from each reader. Okay? It said to clearly state your central idea. Well, in order to do that, we have to understand that everything in a passage, TIES, ties together, and I've got to go look at the topic to make sure I understand it, to clearly understand what the prompt is asking me. Okay? And the prompt said, explain why Judy French is qualified to give advice about bullying. Okay? So, because of the developing your ideas in detail, you can have a hook sentence and you can have a central idea statement, and you can even add a sentence if you want to that um, tells you why you feel that way, because that was what they asked for. Then you can start going into evidence number one that you could explain, maybe using a blue monkey. So there's one sentence of evidence, and I'm going to turn these three middle fingers sideways so you can see that there's an E there. Okay. E, evidence from the text. Okay. 1, 2, 3. All right. Number one is the company that she works for and why it helps. That's found in paragraph 2 and 3. And so if you present that evidence, and then you can explain the evidence, EXP, with at least one sentence, then you're following the structure that's required of an extended constructed response. Evidence number two, she gives her first set of advice on how to support someone that's being bullied in paragraph 4. So you're gonna see that I've presented that evidence, and then I've explained it either with, I can't remember if it was the blue or the orange. And the third piece of evidence, if you want it, and you can even have a fourth one, all the basic colors. Any of you who have ever been to my in-person trainings over the last couple of years should have received a bag of monkeys with about 4 or 5 of each of these 6 colors that you're about to see. Okay. The second uh, set of evidence that shows that she's qualified is the advice she gives about getting help when the situation gets a little bit too dangerous. And then you can explain with one sentence or more. Let's say, for example, if you're in elementary, explain that piece of evidence with at least one sentence. If you're from middle school, maybe you can explain with 2 sentences. In high school, you can maybe explain with 3. There's no magic number, because I've seen kids that explain with just 1 or 2 sentences a piece of evidence and they still get good scores. I'm just giving a suggestion that the more developed the student is in ability, the more developed, the more they should explain themselves what they mean. Because, in reading, inferring is reading between the lines, but explaining is writing between the lines or typing between the lines. Okay. So then we need some sort of an ending, and that would be either 1 or 2 sentences that could bring closure. End 1, ending 2, closing 2, conclusion 3, reflection 3. So it just depends on what student ability or age or grade you're talking about, or how you do this. And so even though I can't use this hand on the test, your students can trace a hand very quickly and make sure that they follow the structure of the 5 bullets that are mentioned in how to get a 5. There's the eye, the thumb, introduction with the idea and maybe a hook. That'd be the body, where you take any number of pieces of evidence and explain. And the conclusion would be the pinky, and the ER would be reminding yourself that the very last bullet on the page says to make sure you take time to edit and revise. Okay, so that's what you have there. I'll dump that out, and I'm going to show you. Um, Let me make sure that I have a certain piece of paper I wanted to share with you guys. Um, there it is. Okay. All right. Ready to go. All right. So if your kids are practicing on paper, which I think is best for now until you master the art of typing, keyboarding with, shifts and learning the periods and all the punctuation marks. Okay. Bill McDonald is my name. If you're going to be sharing this with the whole class, you might use a student number or code so that uh, if you're sharing with the class, they won't know who it is that you're talking about and they won't feel embarrassed because then bullying takes place. Explain why Judy French is qualified to give advice about bullying situations. Okay. What I want to do first is take you to page 68 of the mini binder that I sent to all of you. And you can see that hook number 2 to keep the reader engaged is a hat, because I say hook, hat, hair. If I was using my train, I would call it the whistle. If I was just using my body, I would say it's the wow, whatever you write first to get the reader's attention. So we're going to use this one. Write a sentence in your introduction that the feelings sorry about that, of the character or characters about the idea that you chose in response to the prompt. I'm just going to express my feelings about the topic because you can either choose the topic or the idea to do all of these little hooks and hats and hairs. Okay. So since I want to use emotions, well, when people are bullied, they don't feel happy, so I wouldn't use any of these words. It would be more like sad or mad. And so, depending on my grade level or ability, my teacher would give me a few of these because the prompt this week is going to be about the sadness that takes place when you're bullied. Then you might give your students 5 or 10 of these synonyms for sad so that your students can use this to apply book number 2 to an essay. All right. So the one I'm going to use is heartbreaking. Okay. Heartbroken, heartbreaking, heartsick, heavy hearted. So here's my breakdown of the essay. Hook number 2, you wouldn't be writing this, of course. I'm just writing it so that you guys can know where I'm getting it from. That's from page 68. Starting off by making an emotional connection to the topic and or the idea. It's so heartbreaking to see and hear about all the bullying that is going on in the world today. Because the topic is about bullying, then you're allowed to write anything you want as long as you're trying to make sure everything ties together. Here comes my central idea statement. Judy French, who works for the National Bullying Prevention Center, is well qualified to give advice about bullying. Okay. Because it asks you why, you can either put a period there and say, it's because, or I can continue the sentence, because she has the ability to help people see what it might be like for those being bullied. That's my first why. She also gives common sense ideas on what actions are best if we are present in a bullying scenario. Okay. So let me give the first evidence that, what does working for an organization like the Prevention Center help. So I used paragraph one evidence. Number one, in paragraph one, the author states that the purpose of the company Miss French works for is trying to end bullying. So because she works for the company who does that, that makes her qualified. Okay, here's how I explain it with one sentence. It's important that children and teenagers know that they won't have to fight the battle against bullies alone. Okay, when they know that there's an organization who's teaching the rest of us how to help kids who are being bullied, then hopefully the kids and the teenagers that are getting bullied won't feel completely alone. Okay. So then she gives some scenarios. And so I continue on, like I said, because um, she gives common sense ideas on what actions are best to represent. So here's the first common sense idea. One example of helping someone who is being bullied in the section, show support, talks about what we can do if a bully is making fun of someone or excluding them in a sports activity. Okay. There's the evidence. And then here's me trying to explain it with at least one sentence. The easiest thing we can do is take the side of the person being bullied by giving compliments. So instead of making fun, as uh, you'll see in that passage, we could give compliments and offer to play the sport with you as their partner. Okay. So if they're refusing to let them play, and so you can add to this by saying, in the example, the person was making fun of the kids' shoes and refusing to let them play. That would be one more piece of evidence that you can use that shows that gives the details of what the evidence is, the example. Okay. Then we have another one. The other suggestion that Judy French gives is to get adult help if the situation seems generous. Now, because I wrote larger than I should have, I want you to notice that for this piece of evidence, I didn't explain it. And so what you might have to do is, if you remember this phrase, each evidence example explained and exploded. Well, if you're not going to be able to have room to explain it, and we would because, we're going to have, over 2,000, it's going to be 2,300 characters that we can use. You would make sure that you would add a sentence, but I just wanted to make sure I had that in there. And I'll tell you my explanation on my own, which would be since we already have the green and the blue explaining. So we would need to say, okay, now we need at least one sentence of orange explaining where you either explain and then give the evidence, or you give the evidence and then you explain afterwards. It doesn't matter the order as long as you're taking evidence and explaining it. Okay. So getting help if the situation seems dangerous. So here's me explaining that with one sentence. If the child that's doing the bullying or the person doing the bullying is too big, or there are more than one person, um, causing the problems, it might not be a good idea to get involved uh, because you could end up getting hurt yourself. So that's how I would explain that piece of evidence uh, of her excellent advice. And so then coming back to the topic about Judy and her being qualified, taking her wise advice, because I think she's qualified because she's wise and she gives good advice, will help many who struggle with bullying. So that allows me to take the topic and the idea and kind of bring closure by tying everything together. And that's how I think that there would be enough information here to be able to get hopefully a two for organization development because you do see evidence and some explaining in place. You do have an introduction and a conclusion. Uh, you don't necessarily have to indent, but you can see that there's closure and there's an opening and there is a hook. And, some of you might not want to start doing hooks, but I think if you each week or each month that you write one, however often you're doing one, that you add one of the different hooks from page 68, and I'll model here how to do that. So your kids might start with their own hooks, and I suggest that you stick to that number two and just have them use another emotional word or a phrase, um, where they're either telling or showing their sadness when they're talking about the topic of bullying, or perhaps the joy and the happiness that you might feel because there are people like Judy French in this world who is trying to fix the problem. So there you have it. That was my elementary example. And I want you to notice that for each piece of evidence, I only explained with one sentence. Another piece of evidence, explain with one sentence. That last piece of evidence, I did not explain it. Okay. So you've either got to decide, should I leave that piece of evidence out, or should I make sure when the kid is revising and writing a final draft, you say, make sure that you take time to add that one sentence or more of explanation, then you can bring your end or your ending or your conclusion, reflection, and then take the time to edit and revise when you're done. So thank you so much for watching this video. I will conclude. It's 9:24 p.m. where I'm at right now. I might send the secondary one out tomorrow so I can rest. I was working all day today. Um, but I think what I want you guys to realize is that many secondary students are on a on an elementary ability level when it comes to being able to express themselves in terms of their own ideas, their explaining, which needs to be done regardless of which purpose of writing that we're going to be doing. So even though that was an elementary prompt and purpose and passage, your middle school and high school students could probably benefit from starting with something that's not so rigorous, that only has one page of content. So sometimes at the beginning of the year, especially or the first semester and into the second, kids don't have the endurance to explain or read everything. So what you might do at first is, if you're going to follow the finger method, maybe start off with the I love you approach. They're going to have a central idea with a simple hook, one piece of evidence that they explain with one or two sentences, and then an ending that brings it all together. So that's going to help your kids. They'll still have an IBC, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, but it won't be as complex as some of your kids who are not ready, because there's always going to be somebody who's going to say, no one in elementary should ever have to write an essay. Well, I don't believe that, and not even one bit, because I think that I can teach you how to write a sentence, then I can teach you how to write a paragraph, and then I can teach you how to write an essay, and then I can teach you how to write an essay well, because I believe in myself, I believe in my students, And believe it or not, most students are either going to raise or lower their standards to our level of expectations. So don't be the reason why your kids have low quality responses just because you just want to teach the same acronym or the same hook all year long. Ask a question about the topic that's as original as the sun coming up every morning. Remember this phrase, the reader is the eater of my words. If I have to grade several hundred essays a day and every single kid from your school is making me eat a question about the prompt, that's eating the same thing over and over. If you teach them to end the same, if the introduction is the appetizer, if the body is the meat and the vegetables, meat and the vegetables, the evidence in the way you explain it, then the conclusion would be the dessert. But if you teach the students to restate and repeat in their conclusion, that's not dessert. That's like giving the reader leftovers. And I think if I have to read the same exact wording, phrasing, sentence every single time, because of the barcoding, many graders have told me they end up having to read the essays not only from the same district, but from the same campus and often even the same classroom, just because of the barcoding and how they're sent out uh, to the 25% human graders, supposedly, and 75%. Um, Now, somebody might say, well, Bill, Dr. Bill, I don't think I'm going to teach hooks because the computer, the algorithm, the automated scoring engine is not going to know that they're talking about the topic of bullying or Judy. Well, because I used the word bullying and the emotional connection of it, I talked about the part of the topic, not the person, but the idea that's expressed in there, then the computer will recognize that the student is writing something that's drawing attention to the topic that's being discussed. So do not teach in such a box that it becomes more like a casket. There are some essays that when I read them, it's like I want to give them CPR and bring them back to life because there's just nothing engaging, nothing interesting. It's just the same old format, formula, structure from one essay to the next all day long. So I'm here to teach those of you who want to take that next step this year and help your students little by little grow in the quality and quantity of their response to get more sixes through tens from both readers than zeros through fives. And that's a promise for every single person who purchases part one and or part two of these recorded trainings. God bless you. You're in my prayers. Have a blessed week this coming week. Don't forget to sign up if you want to continue to receive the elementary and secondary weekly mini tests, just like the ones I've been modeling this week. You'll have to sign up for part two or for both parts. Part one will be if you have a lot of kids who are getting zeros, they're in la la land, zero land, and one land, and you're trying to figure out how to get them to two land uh, so that there will be zero zeros. It's entirely possible, and I'd be happy to help you if you signed up for part one or part two to actually look at some essays. As long as you show me the prompt and the passage, I'm I'm going to be able to do what I call PE, take the passage and the essay and be able to show you how to do the work that it's going to take to move it up one score point in organization development and at the same time improve on the conventions, the grammar, the editing quality. Thank you guys and God bless.